Well, there is good news today. In this very complex, very challenging year of 2020, it turns out that there's a vaccine. Actually, it looks like a few vaccines that are online and will soon be available to protect us against COVID. That's really good. And it leads to an important decision. Who will the lucky ones be that get to be the first to be vaccinated against COVID? I was reading this week that among that group, almost certainly, will be the most vulnerable in our midst. The elderly, people isolated in nursing homes, people who are most at risk. That's a dumb idea. Why would we waste the vaccine on them? They're mostly on their way out anyhow. Let's give it to the people who are smart. Let's give it to the people who are strong. Let's give it to the people who are beautiful. Let's give it to the people that we want to be in charge of our world. Let's give it to the young that are going to be around for a while, making maybe an occasional exception for somebody who's 63 that has extraordinary measures of energy and vigor. Now, of course, nobody is advocating for that. Nobody is advocating to say, let's give it to the strong and the wealthy and the smart. Pretty much everybody would be saying, let's give it to the most vulnerable among us. Why? Well, that question doesn't get raised too often. You might think it's just basic human decency or just common sense, or it's obvious to anybody with a brain. But I will tell you a little secret. Throughout human history, that notion that those who are most vulnerable are worthy of sacrificial love is not common sense. There's a scholar, a classicist named Tom Holland, and he's written a book recently called Dominion: How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. And he writes about having been drawn most of his life to the age of the antiquities and how the Greek and Roman gods and goddesses were like rock stars, and there was a lot of glamour in that age. But he writes that the more he immersed himself in the study of the ancient world, the less he felt at home there, because there were values that were glaringly absent. For example, the value that says that the weak and the vulnerable have intrinsic worth and ought to be cared for even though they are not useful. He writes, in his morals and his ethics, he was not a Spartan. He was not a Roman. Well, what happened to the world of the Romans and the world of Sparta? I will tell you what happened. He will tell you in this book what happened. What happened was Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus came with an understanding of the world that did create a revolution. And those of us who live in what are sometimes called the West or the Western culture are recipients of it, beneficiaries of it. Jesus taught that at the root of reality, at the foundation, is God, and God is love. And so love is what makes the world go round. And because human beings are made in the image of this God, because they are beloved by this God, every one of them has intrinsic worth, not just the strong, not just the rich, not just the beautiful. And that in fact, he takes from the prophetic literature of Israel, those who are most vulnerable, the orphans and the widows and the aliens and the poor, are the ones that God especially looks out for, because he knows this sinful, twisted world is likely to destroy and discard them. And so Holland writes that the world in which he wants to live, even though he himself is not a Christian, even though he severely criticizes Christianity for all the ways in which we fall far short of these kind of values, but he wants to live in the world whose values about caring for the vulnerable have in fact been reshaped by Jesus, who became the expression of God. Very interesting. He writes about how claims to divinity in the ancient world were not all that uncommon. That the line between the divine and the earthly was pretty permeable. Rulers in Egypt had been worshipped for centuries. Julius Caesar was thought to have ascended into the heavenlies marked by a comet. Caesar Augustus in Jesus' day was called the Son of God. But to be divine belonged to the rulers, to the victors, to the strong, to the people who were in charge. To be divine meant you had the ability to torture your enemies. The idea that someone could claim to be divine who himself was tortured on a cross was unthinkable, scandalous, grotesque to Rome. The idea that God had a son who was crucified on a cross was scandalous to the Jews. but this was Jesus. And he taught a new way of understanding reality and a new way of looking at people, what is sometimes called the great reversal. It's the opposite of our world, where instead of having to go first believing to be truly blessed are the wealthy and the strong and the smart and the well-connected, blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. And he constantly taught about this. His teachings very often were drawn from the world of the humble and the poor. And it wasn't just his teachings, it was also his life. From the day that he was born in a manger till the day he died on a cross, he lived the great reversal. He humbled himself to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has given him the name that is above every name. And so now we're invited to enter into this great reversal. Paul writes to the church at Corinth, 2 Corinthians 5, therefore, we regard no one any longer from a worldly point of view. Although we used to regard Jesus himself that way. Who's powerful? Somebody that's strong and rich, and we no longer do. If anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old has gone, the new has come. So the invitation today is enter into the great reversal. Ask not what people can I use, but what people can I help? A friend of mine was talking to his son recently about selfishness, the great epidemic of our day in all ages. And he was saying to his son, you got to clean up your room, otherwise it would be selfish. And his son asked, well, what does it mean to be selfish? And his dad said, well, to be selfish means I put myself first, and I think everybody else ought to just make me happy and do what I want them to do. And his son said, I want to be selfish. Well, that's the cry of the human heart apart from God. That was the cry of Augustus and Caesar and Sparta and Rome. And Jesus engineers the great reversal. So now I enter into that. In this season where there's lots of reflection, it's been very challenging to me to think about the church, which is Jesus' community, and that I have served or tried to serve, but I wonder how many times did I end up trying to use the church to make me feel good about me or to make me feel like I was being successful, as opposed to actually serving the people in the church one at a time. That's the great reversal. So now I want to invite you today, in light of the life of Jesus, who has reshaped our world, to enter into the great reversal. If you're a kid and you're going to go for a car ride in the family car, instead of calling out the best seat, I'm riding shotgun, say, I'm going to ride backseat middle. If you're going to be on a Zoom call with somebody today, see how you can make somebody else sound good. Give somebody else credit for an idea. If you sponsor a child through Compassion International, write them a letter today and tell them that you love them. And if you don't sponsor a child like that, go ahead and sponsor one. Today, begin to look at other people through a new set of eyes. Join the great reversal. Regard no one from a worldly point of view. Look at everybody the way Jesus did. And I'll see you tomorrow.